Did you know Australian tanks performed some of the hardest fighting of the war, often in places where heat-cooked metal and jungle swallowed sound? While bigger nations argued over steel and numbers, Australia built machines meant to survive rot, dust, rain, and ambush. These weren't tanks that just looked powerful. They were actually made to keep moving when tracks sank, engines choked, and visibility vanished. Their crews fought for their country day and night. And in this video, I'll take you on a journey through the deadliest Australian tanks of World War II. So, let's start with Matilda 6. You know what kind of tank earns respect in a jungle? Not the fast one, not the flashy one, the one that just refuses to stop. That was the Matilda II in Australian hands. Slow, thick-skinned, and brutally stubborn. This tank became the machine Australian infantry trusted when the Pacific turned every ridge into a hidden bunker line. Australian armored units leaned on Matildas because they could keep crawling forward when visibility vanished and ambushes happened at handshake distance. Their battlefield role locked them into the ugliest work imaginable: close infantry escort, bunker smashing, and grinding through mud and broken ground where wheeled vehicles simply gave up. And sometimes the jungle answered back. On Tarakan, a Japanese mine blasted a Matilda nearly 18 feet into the air. The crew survived. A soldier riding on the back didn't. Both legs were badly shattered. That's what these tanks walked into. No sweeping maneuvers, no clean lines, just meter-by-meter movement while bomb disposal teams and infantry worked under the same threat, clearing paths through earth that wanted every machine destroyed. Matilda Frog, flamethrower. This one exists for a very uncomfortable reason. Somewhere along the Pacific Front, it became clear that shells alone weren't solving the problem. So Australians took Matilda tanks and turned them into something far more intimate. The Frog flamethrower conversion replaced the main gun with a flame system built for close-range bunker clearing. That modification tells you everything about the war it was meant to fight. Short sightlines, dug-in enemies, and positions that swallowed rifle sections whole. These weren't tanks designed to trade fire across open fields. They were built for moments when the enemy was 10 meters away and buried under logs and dirt. The Australian War Memorial records Matilda Frogs from the 2-1 Armoured Reconnaissance Regiment operating around Balikpapan during the Borneo fighting. Their role wasn't theoretical. It was brutally practical. Flame wasn't an extra. It was a battlefield solution in terrain where clever angles didn't matter, but certainty did. M3 Stuart Light Tank Australia met the M3 Stuart the hard way. In 1942, Australian armoured regiments began receiving the light tank, and the 26th Armoured Regiment trained on it before A Squadron was sent into Papua. Then Buna happened. December 1942 dragged Stuarts into a world they were never meant to love: swamps, kunai grass, rotting heat, and firing lines no one could see. At Bunagona, Australian Stuarts supported infantry attacks directly, pushing into Japanese positions that had been dug, camouflaged, and wired to kill. Tanks were knocked out. Others came back shredded. The lesson landed fast. Stuarts could crack a line, but light armor in jungle fighting meant the margin for error barely existed. One wrong lane, one hidden gun, one mine under wet ground, and a tank stopped being a weapon and started being a burning landmark. M3 Grant, before Australia even knew what jungle tank warfare really looked like, it knew it needed armor fast. The M3 Grant became part of that answer. Tall, awkward, and undeniably practical, Grants formed a major part of Australia's early war armoured buildup during the invasion scare years. They were meant to give the country a hard arm in a moment when nothing felt certain. Australian War Memorial imagery places General Grant M3 tanks with the 1st Australian Armoured Division during reviews and manoeuvres at Puckapunyal in June 1942, with further records showing a Grant on a transporter during manoeuvres dated 7th September 1942. They weren't museum pieces. They were being worked, moved, and tested. Within the 4th Armoured Brigade, created specifically around jungle infantry support, Matilda the Sows and M3 Grants formed part of the pool used for development and operational preparation linked to New Guinea, Bougainville, and Borneo. Grants weren't beautiful machines. They were stopgaps, backbones, and test beds, used while Australia figured out what actually survived mud, rain, and ambush country. AC-1 Sentinel. This one never burned on a battlefield, and somehow that makes it heavier. The AC-1 Sentinel was the only tank type produced in quantity in Australia during the Second World War. It was born out of fear. Fear that the Pacific War could arrive on Australian soil before help did. Design work began around 1940-41. Production followed through 1942 and into 1943. By mid-1943, 65 had been built. Then the program stopped. Not because the need vanished, because supply changed. American tanks became available. Strategic priorities shifted. And the Sentinel was quietly pulled back into evaluation and training roles instead of operational service. No combat record. No burned hulls in New Guinea. Just foundries, rushed casting techniques, design compromises, and an entire domestic tank industry built under pressure and then frozen. That's the darker edge of its story. Australia built a tank meant to survive invasion and jungle warfare, and the battlefield it was made for never arrived. AC-3 Thunderbolt. Funny thing is, Australia didn't abandon its own tanks because it lacked imagination. It stopped because it had too much. The AC-3 Thunderbolt was the moment engineers tried to push the Sentinel beyond its limits. The biggest change was brutal and simple: firepower. To fix the AC-1's weakness, Australia fitted a 25-pounder field gun as a tank weapon, chasing heavier punch and stronger high-explosive power for the kinds of targets the Pacific kept throwing back: bunkers, timbered nests, and hidden strongpoints cut into jungle earth. A test-fitted 25-pounder was fired in 1942, proving the idea could work. From there, the AC-3 concept matured as the successor line. It was never meant to sit still. It was meant to keep moving when engines choked, when tracks sank, when heat ruined everything mechanical. But industry doesn't fight wars alone. Shifting strategic supply and growing access to American tanks strangled the program before it could become a real wartime fleet. Well, now let's talk about Matilda Hedgehog. Some weapons are born from inspiration. This one was born from frustration. When normal tank guns kept failing against Pacific bunkers, Australia dragged a naval idea straight onto land. A Hedgehog spigot mortar array was bolted onto a Matilda, turning the tank into a launcher for clusters of heavy bombs. The intention wasn't elegance, it was geometry. Japanese positions were buried under dirt and timber, angled to deflect shells, so the Hedgehog aimed to drop explosive weight straight into them. Logs, soil, overhead cover, none of it mattered if the blast arrived from above. The design was savage, practical, and deeply Pacific in spirit. The 2/4th Armored Regiment was issued 6 of these machines. They were meant for Bougainville. They were meant for the worst fighting. And then the war moved faster than steel. They arrived after it was over. No bunkers, no ambush lines, No crews needed them anymore. Matilda Dozer. At some point, Australia realized guns alone weren't winning jungle battles. Ground was. Roads didn't exist. Clearings were lies. And every stopped tank became a target. So the Matilda was turned into something else entirely. Not just a weapon, but a machine that could physically change the battlefield. The Dozer Matilda, Aust numbered 1, was developed in early 1945 and tested on Morotai in June, exactly when Borneo operations were demanding heavy engineering under fire. It carried a Caterpillar D7 bulldozer blade and a winch system, with blade height controlled by cables and a repurposed Jeep engine powering the winch. Pure wartime improvisation. This wasn't about speed. It was about survival. Clearing lanes, pushing earth, cutting paths through the jungle and rubble so tanks could move instead of becoming targets. Official history of the 1st Armored Regiment lists 3 Matilda Dozers in its Balikpapan tank set, alongside frogs and gun tanks. That lineup says everything. Matilda Bridge Layer Support. If you want to understand jungle warfare, forget the firefights for a second. Think about water, creeks, gullies, blown crossings. One missing bridge could stall an entire advance and turn a column into a trapped target. Australia treated that reality seriously. Bridge-laying capability became part of the armored package that went in with the infantry. At Balikpapan, the Australian War Memorial records that the tank group's equipment mix included a bridge-laying tank, not as a luxury, as insurance. Because getting stuck in the Pacific wasn't inconvenient, it was lethal. Ambush lines were meters away. Extra days meant extra graves. Tanks Encyclopedia also notes that the 2-1 Armored Brigade Reconnaissance Squadron operated a Covenanter bridge-laying vehicle tied directly to the same jungle problem, broken crossings and terrain that destroyed momentum. This is the quiet brutality people miss. The deadliest armor isn't always firing. Sometimes it's laying steel over water, so everyone else doesn't die waiting. AC-4 Cruiser Tank. There's something almost defiant about this one. Even with war-strained resources, Australia kept pushing its own tank program forward. The AC-4 was meant to follow the Thunderbolt as the next step. Stronger, thicker, and armed to compete with the best. It was intended to mount the British 17-pounder anti-tank gun, one of the most potent weapons of the entire war. To reach that level, engineers tested dual 25-pounder derivatives and different gun configurations. This wasn't a post-war sketch. Detailed design work and armament trials happened during the height of the Pacific struggle, with prototypes built and tested in late 1942. Armor protection was planned to exceed earlier Sentinels, using a cast hull and turret, an Australian steel solution that meant literally pouring their own armor instead of bolting plates together. But like the Sentinel and Thunderbolt before it, the AC-4 never saw combat. Production never moved beyond prototype development. And now let's move to M4 Sherman. What's interesting about the Sherman in Australia isn't how famous it was. It's how suspicious it was treated. While the rest of the world mass-produced it, Australian planners treated it like a tool that still had to earn its place. The 4th Armored Brigade didn't accept reputation alone. It ran Shermans through trials. 2 were tested in Queensland in mid-1944, then later taken into the Madang region and worked under real New Guinea conditions, alongside the same Churchill comparison process that was reshaping Australian armored thinking. Humidity, rot, mud, heat. Those were the judges. Could it move when the tracks wanted to sink? Could it function when everything mechanical started to decay? That was the question Australia cared about. In global terms, the Sherman was the war's factory answer. In Australian terms, it was something far narrower and nastier, a machine being measured against jungle reality. LVT Alligator. There's no easing into a Pacific landing. You don't arrive gently. You shove steel into surf and hope it doesn't stall. That's where the LVT lives in this story. Not a turreted tank, not a parade machine, but absolutely part of the Brutality ecosystem. This is how you reach the nightmare. The LVT family was produced from 1941 to 1945, and British and Australian forces used them in combat. The Australian War Memorial documents LVTs, alligators, moving toward shore at Balikpapan on 1st July 1945 with Australian infantry aboard. That image alone tells the whole story. Tracked hulls pushing through water, troops riding metal into gunfire. No cover, no quiet, just engines, surf, and seconds that mattered. This wasn't about heroic charges. It was about delivery, about getting men onto a beach that didn't want them there. Rover Light Armored Car Australia didn't build this because it wanted to. It built it because it had to. When the UK couldn't spare vehicles, Australia answered with its own steel. The Rover Light Armored Car rolled out in 1942 on a Ford CMP truck chassis, using locally fabricated armor plates and whatever industry could provide. Its nickname came fast: the Mobile Slit Trench. Crews had to poke their heads up through narrow openings, exposed while scouting and screening, expected to see danger before danger saw them. Armor was thin. Armament was modest, usually machine guns. And yet, this was exactly the kind of vehicle used to watch jungle edges where ambush and hidden anti-tank threats waited. The Rover never fought major battles, but its story still cuts deep. Spare engines, steel panels, local workshops. Australia was building what it could with what it had, not to dominate battlefields, but to survive the uncertainty of jungle warfare and inland defense. Dingo Scout Car speed mattered in the Pacific, but not the racing kind, the disappearing kind. Between 1942 and 1945, Australia produced 245 Dingo Scout cars to answer a very specific need in the Southwest Pacific: eyes that could move. Powered by a Ford V8 and armed with a Bren light machine gun, the Dingo wasn't meant to win battles. It was meant to find them. Heavy heat, mud, and steep tracks made vehicular movement miserable in New Guinea and Borneo. Anything that could dodge hazards, slip through broken ground, and report back was worth its weight in armor. Dingoes darted ahead of slower formations, becoming the first metal shapes to touch unknown terrain. They avoided tank duels because that wasn't their war. Their burden was reconnaissance, rolling into spaces where a single wrong turn could become an ambush. T-17E1, Staghound Armored Car. Not all of Australia's armor came from Australian factories. Some of it arrived because the war demanded heavier eyes. The T-17E1 Staghound was a heavy armored car supplied by the United States to Commonwealth forces and operated by Australia alongside its own Rover and Dingo designs. This wasn't a light scout. Staghounds carried thicker armor, longer range, and heavier weapons. With a crew of 4, they typically mounted a 37mm gun, and later variants carried a 3-inch gun, turning them into something closer to a mobile gun platform than a simple reconnaissance vehicle. That balance mattered. It meant Australian elements could push deeper through broken country, where visibility failed, rubber suffered, and infantry needed both eyes and punch up front. The Staghound didn't fight classic tank duels. Its value lived elsewhere, survival across distance, across heat, across terrain that destroyed lighter wheels. Each tank in this video carries the weight of a war fought up close, where survival mattered more than speed, and where steel didn't conquer the jungle, only endured it. Thanks for watching. Make sure to press the subscribe button for future updates. Take care. We'll meet again soon.